Good morning, students. How are you? Shall we start overhead topic? Good. Theory with respect to overhead. You know, on the base of relationship, cost can be classified into two types: direct cost and indirect cost. Direct cost represent what? Cost which are directly attributable to produce of products are called direct cost. Collection of all direct costs are called prime cost. Then indirect cost represent costs which are indirectly helps you to produce a products are known as indirect cost. Collection of all indirect costs are known as overhead. So overhead represent what? Indirect cost. Costs which are indirectly helps you to produce a product are known as indirect cost. Collection of all the indirect costs are called overhead. That overhead can be broadly classified into production overhead, administration overhead, selling and distribution overhead, and research and development overhead. Broadly classified into four types: production, administration, selling and distribution, research and development. Then these are all relating to cost. The overheads are relating to cost object. Cost object. What is called the cost object that we are going to discuss in the next topic is called ABC, activity based costing. And this cannot be traced with its an economically feasible way. Direct cost means one-to-one relationship would be there. In case of indirect cost, one-to-one relationship may not be there. Therefore, economically not feasible to trace one-to-one relationship. Now, example for the indirect cost: supervisor salary, admin people salary, form part of indirect expenses cost. Whenever we come across overhead, you have to remember steps to solve overhead. Unless otherwise you understand the steps, very difficult to solve the practical problem. So steps to solve overhead is the most important one. What are all the various steps are there to solve overhead? First one, collection. Second step, classification. Third one is allocation. Next, apportionment, reapportionment, and recovery. So totally 6 steps you have to remember. Whenever you come across overhead related problem, you have to remember all the 6 steps. I'll repeat what are the: collection, classification, allocation, apportionment, reapportionment, and recovery. Now I'll explain one by one. Collection. Collection represent what? Collecting the data, collecting the information is called collection. Clear? Collecting the data or collecting the information is called collection. Then collection over. Or for example, if you go to claim place, suppose you are getting reimbursement, claiming reimbursement expenses from your client. They ask you to sign one voucher. The voucher nothing but collecting the data. What purpose they spend the money. Now you understand. So collection is nothing but what? Collecting the data. The expenses incurred, we are going to what? Collect. So these are all the expenses incurred. After collection, yes, these are all the expenses incurred. Then we have to classify the expenses. So second step is called classification. Classification is nothing but collected expenses. We have to classify it into variable cost separately and fixed cost separately. Classification of expenses into variable and fixed cost is called classification. Clear? Behavior nothing but behavior wise classification. Then collection over, classification over. Why we have to do the classification variable cost separately and fixed cost separately? Because the most important point is variable costs are going to incur based on actual capacity, whereas fixed cost, irrespective of the actual capacity, based on budgeted capacity, we have to incur. That's the reason, even for the purpose of what sharing the expenses, variable cost we have to go by way of actual, whereas fixed cost you have to apportion based on budgeted capacity. Understood? So first step collection over, next classification over. Now we are moving to allocation. Allocation represent what? Allocation represent Transferring of specific expenses to the specific department is called allocation. Allocation represents transferring of specific expenses to specific department. Therefore, allocation arises only in case of specific expenses. Allocation arises only in case of specific expenses. So what do you mean by allocation? Transferring of specific expenses to the specific department is called allocation. Apportionment arises only in case of common expenses. Apportionment arises only in case of what? Common expenses. Allocation means specific expenses. Apportionment means common expenses. What do you mean by apportionment? Transferring of common expenses to all the department on suitable basis is called apportionment. Transferring of common expenses to all the department on suitable basis is called apportionment. Therefore, allocation arises only in case of specific department. Apportionment arises only in case of common. Allocation arises only in case of specific expenses. Apportionment arises only in case of common expenses. Next, reapportionment. Re means what? Again. Okay, that's why re. Therefore, already apportioned expenses, again we are going to apportion. That's why it's called re. That reapportionment arises only in case of service department. So whenever service departments are there, reapportionment arises. What is called reapportionment? Transferring of service department expenses to the production department is called reapportionment. Transferring of service department expenses to production department is called reapportionment. Comfortable or not? So allocation arises only in case of specific expenses. Apportionment arises only in case of common expenses. Reapportionment arises only in case of service department. And recovery. What do you mean by recovery? Recovery nothing but recovery rate per hour. So total expenses of the production overhead divided by number of hours is equal to recovery. Formula for recovery is what? Total expenses of the production department divided by number of hours is equal to recovery rate per hour. Clear? So reapportionment and recovery. Now if you are going to see properly, reapportionment we said what? Transferring of service department expenses to production department. Therefore, all the service department expenses has been transferred to production department. That's the reason. Recovery represents total expense of the production department, because there is no service department expense. Everything has been transferred to production department. Total expense of the production department divided by number of hours is equal to recovery rate per hour. In general, student used to think recovery means, based on the sound, it may look like income. Recovery is not income. Here recovery represents expenses per hour, overhead per hour. Per hour rate is called what? Recovery. So these are all the various steps you have to remember to solve overhead problem. What are all the steps you have to remember? Collection, classification, allocation, apportionment, reapportionment, and recovery. Specific expenses means allocation. Common expenses means apportionment. Service department is there means reapportionment. Comfortable? Why we have to transfer the service department expenses to production department? Because service departments are rendering services to the production department. To produce the product, what all the department going to help? Those departments are called the service department. And ultimately, we are going to ascertain the cost of the product. Product we are going to produce only in production department. That's the reason we have to transfer all the service department cost to production department. That's why the previous topic also I said, each and every topic we want to achieve any one of the objectives of costing. What are all the objectives of costing? Ascertainment of cost, determination of selling price, ascertainment of profit, cost control, cost reduction, and decision making purpose. In cost sheet, what are the object? We have achieved ascertainment of the cost of the product. Material costing, what are the object? we want to minimize the cost. Therefore, cost control and cost reduction. Labor costing, what are the object? Again, minimization of cost. Therefore, cost reduction and cost control. Overhead, what are the object? We want to ascertain the cost. Recovery rate per hour. Based on that, we are going to ascertain the cost of the product. Ascertainment of the cost is the object behind overhead. Clear? Now, the next important. So now you know various steps with respect to solve overhead problem. Now, with respect to recovery, also called its absorption. Recovery also called absorption. Charging of overhead with the overhead cost with every unit of output is called recovery. Made 1998 and November 2001, this question has been asked with respect to recovery. Overhead absorption is based on in what basis recovery happen, in what basis that absorption happen. For that, they are mentioning 5 bases are there for the purpose of that absorption. One is percentage of, I am talking about recovery. Okay. One is percentage of direct material, percentage of labor, percentage of prime cost, labor hour rate, mission hour rate. Okay. Just 3 more questions. 5 points you have to remember. Okay. Charging of overhead cost with every unit of output is called recovery. Also called absorption. Overhead absorption is based on 5 methods. What are they? First one, percentage of direct material, percentage of direct labor, percentage of prime cost, labor hour rate, and mission hour rate. Most important question. Okay. Now, kindly make a note parallelly how to write, then only you can have the better grip. Okay. Because theory and all seems to be very easy to understand, but very difficult to reproduce all the point in exam. In examination, number of points also equally important. Comfortable. Next. The next important question, difference between allocation and apportionment. What are the difference between allocation and apportionment? You know the main difference based on the concept. Allocation is for specific expenses. Apportionment is for one common expenses. Yes, that's the main difference. Allocation represent, it means identifying the cost center and charging its expenses in full amount you are going to transfer. This is the expenses incurred for this particular department. Therefore, I am allocating all the expenses to that particular department, transferring of full expenses to that particular department. Whereas apportionment represent allotment of proportion of the common expenses to cost center. Proportionate basis, all the department we are going to apportion. Sharing the expenses is called what? Sharing itself what? Portion of the expenses only I am going to transfer. Therefore, so all the expenses, what? I am going to transfer in portion basis, that is what? Share basis to every department. That is called what? Apportionment. Allocation versus apportionment, most important question. November 90, 94, November 2001, May 2008, 2013, 2014, that much popular question. Whenever you come across different between question, put a tabular format. Okay, allocation versus apportionment. Next one, specific costs are directly allocated to the cost center in case of allocation. Specific costs are directly allocated to the cost center. Whereas in apportionment, common costs which cannot be directly allocated are apportioned on some suitable basis. So here specific expenses in case of allocation, in case of apportionment, common expenses. Third point, nature of expenses specific and identifiable. Whereas in case of apportionment, nature of expenses general and common. Then allocation allot whole amount of cost to the cost center or cost unit. Whereas apportionment allot part of the cost to the cost center and or cost unit. In case of allocation, no basis is required because full amount you are going to transfer. In case of apportionment, we need a suitable basis for the same. Then allocation, expenses are charged in full, that is charging of expenses only to one particular cost center. Same point only. Whereas in apportionment, expenses are charged in proportion, that is charging of expenses to more than one cost center. Clear? So specific expenses mean allocation, common expenses mean apportionment. Best example with respect to apportionment, rent. Company as a whole paid the rent. Department A, Department B, Department C, more than one department will be there. We have to share the expenses. In what basis you have to share the expenses with the expenses to all the department A, B, C on suitable basis. What is suitable basis? Area in square meter. So rent is a best example for apportionment. We have apportioned based on area in square meter. Suppose some particular expenses incurred only for one particular department alone, then we have to go by way of allocation. So allocation and apportionment. Comfortable? 10. Concept based question. This question also very frequently asked. 5 mark question. 4 or 5 mark question. Any 4 points will be their common expenses. We have to identify basis for apportionment. Shall we try? Then basis of apportionment of common expenses. Common expenses. You have to try what could be the basis. Rent already we discussed. In what basis? Area in square meter. Can you please try similarly other point? Depreciation. In what basis? Value of assets. Value of assets. You know, financial statement. How much the value of asset? Accordingly, you are going to apply the respective percentage. Okay. Then repairs and maintenance. Machineries, repairs and maintenance. Again, value of assets. Every point carries 1 mark. Okay. Supervisor salary. Supervisor salary based on time spent. How many hours you spend for each and every department. Accordingly, you have to apportion. Then electricity charges based on number of light points. Number of light points. Power based on horsepower rates. Electricity is different, power is different. Okay, power is based on horsepower rates. Insurance based on value of assets. Fire insurance on building based on floor area occupied. Canteen expenses based on number of employees. Carriage outwards based on volume of units sold. Volume of units sold. Material handling expenses. Material handling expenses based on volume of material consumed. Then delivery expenses based on weight. Okay. Indirect expenses based on direct wages. Sundries based on direct wages. Miscellaneous expenses based on direct wages. So the residual expenses, if there is no proper basis, then we can apportion based on direct wages. Comfortable? Next. Now we can move for reapportionment. Methods of reapportionment. That's also famous question. 99, 2004, okay, 2010, they asked the question. Reapportionment arises only in case of what? In case of common expenses. That is what? Service department. What do you mean by reapportionment? Transferring of service department expenses to the production department is called reapportionment. So with respect to reapportionment, only if there is a service department, we have to do what? Reapportionment. Methods are there for reapportionment. What are the various methods of reapportionment? Depending upon the probability only, method will come. In examination, which method is applicable, they won't tell. It is your duty to identify based on the probability in what. How to identify? Okay, that is what you are going to discuss. Because based on reapportionment, even 12 to 14 more question, practical question will come. Further, they won't give clue which method is applicable. You have to identify based on this theory only. Now we understand the importance of the theory. Okay? Since students are not studying the theory properly, they are unable to get what even the 40 mark in the main exam. If you are strong in theory, happily you can cross. Practical problem also, you have the better grip, and the theory question also easily can cross. Minimum 20 mark you can get. 20 mark is equal to what? 50% of the pass mark. Okay. Now, the first probability. The first probability, in which circumstance reapportionment arises? If there is a service department. Yes. The first probability, service department render services. Before that, let the X and Y is equal to service department. A and B represent production department. Department A and B are called what? Production department. And X and Y represent service department. Now, the first probability, X renders services to A and B, Y renders services to A and B. X and Y represent service department, A and B is the production department. X renders services to A and B, Y renders services to A and B. Then we have to solve the problem by way of direct distribution method. Which method is applicable? Direct distribution. Second probability, listen carefully. X renders services to A and B, Y renders services to A, B, and X. Are you with me? X renders services to A, B, R. In other words, if you can take this panel also, X renders services to A, B, and Y renders services only to A and B. Understood? X renders services to A, B, and Y, whereas department Y renders services only to A and B. Then we have to solve the problem by way of step ladder method. Which method? Step ladder method. Third probability, X renders services to A, B, and Y renders services to A, B, and X. Then we have to solve the problem by way of reciprocal method. What method? Reciprocal method. So what are all the methods are there? First, direct distribution method, step ladder method, and reciprocal method. Three methods are there. Direct distribution method. It's an easy way to understand. Direct distribution method applicable if service department renders services only to the production department. If service departments are render services only to the production department, then we have to solve the problem by way of direct distribution method. Second one, step ladder method is applicable when if one service department renders services to the production department as well as the another service department, whereas the another service department renders services only to the production department. I'll repeat once again. One service department renders services to production department as well as the another service department, whereas the another service department renders services only to the production department. Then we have to solve the problem by way of step ladder method. Third probability, both the service departments are render services to each other. Reciprocal. Okay, both the service departments are render services to each other in addition to rendering service to production department. Then it is called reciprocal method. Under reciprocal method, two different techniques are there. One is simultaneous equation method. Another one is called the repeated distribution method. Simultaneous equation and repeated distribution. So now you are comfortable with respect to various methods. In which method is applicable in examination, they won't specify. Depending upon the availability of the information, depending upon the probability, the particular question, last line item, they'll give X renders services to A, B, and Y. Y renders services to A, B, and A and B alone. What is the percentage? The percentage will be there. Accordingly, you have to choose. Reciprocal services there means reciprocal method. One part only center only to what's the production department, then you have to go by of step ladder, you have to go by of direct distribution method. Based on the probability involved, you have to solve the problem. And the two techniques I said, what are the simultaneous equation, repeated distribution. Simultaneous equations are very frequently asked question, and in general they will specify we have to solve the problem by way of simultaneous equation. Suppose nothing is specified, it is your choice only. Techniques only, any one of the technique you can apply. The question is silent mean between two technique, any one of the technique you can be the question dot out. Okay, now points to be remembered. Costs which are indirectly help you to produce the products are called indirect cost. Only indirectly attributable to produce a cost, nothing but indirect cost alone form part of this particular topic. Rather, direct material, direct labor and all will not form part of this particular topic over here. Okay, we'll solving the big problem. Okay, 12-mark problem. The chance of committing mistake is high. Direct material will be there in the question. Direct labor, that and all for the purpose of ascertainment of the cost, not for the purpose of the allocation, apportionment, reapportionment. Okay, so here in this topic, we have to consider only indirect cost alone. Then in overhead, we have to consider indirect expenses alone. Direct material, direct labor, direct expense of the production department should not be considered for primary or secondary distribution. What is called the primary distribution? Allocation plus apportionment is called primary distribution. Allocation plus apportionment. Reapportionment is called secondary distribution. Therefore, whether allocation or apportionment or reapportionment or primary distribution or secondary distribution, we should not consider direct material, direct labor, direct expenses of the production department, not service department, production department. Same direct material, direct labor, direct expenses of the service department you have to consider, because all the expenses incurred for the service departments are indirectly help you to produce a product. Since it is indirectly help you to produce a product, service department expenses, all the expenses of the service departments are indirect expenses only. Understood? That's the reason direct material, direct labor, direct expenses of the production departments are not applicable. Whereas same direct material, direct labor, direct expenses of the service departments, it's form part of this particular topic because it's the indirect expenses. Comfortable? Then, in general, the indirect expenses, miscellaneous expenses, indirect wages, miscellaneous expenses and all, we have to apportion based on what? Apportion based on direct wages. But, in case of mission-dependent industry, we have to apportion based on mission hour rate instead of direct wages. Based on the practical question, post exam question available. Clear? Kindly refer to book. PH limited problem will be there. There they have solved by way of the same issue. Clear? Indirect wages or indirect expenses, they saw apportion based on indirect expenses. They are apportion based on, instead of direct wages, they are apportion based on mission hour rate. And next important point, power, we have to apportion based on what? Kilowatt hours. But kilowatt hours of the every department we need. One particular question, again the same PH limited problem in our LMR book. Kindly refer, most important question. Power, horsepower, kilowatt hours or horsepower rate is important. In that particular problem, horsepower of the machine was given and how many hours machine worked was given. Therefore, machine's horsepower, how many hours it's worked, if you are going to multiply, total horsepower we can get. So after doing multiplication, total horsepower in that ratio you have to apportion. But unfortunately, in that past exam question, machine horsepower they took for the purpose of apportionment. Therefore, student got what? No mark in that particular exam. Therefore, very careful. That particular problem is most important one. Clear? So, kilowatt hours or horsepower is important for what? Power. But horsepower of the machine is there, then number of hours worked, if you are going to multiply, total horsepower is important. Clear? Then, so these are all the important points you have to remember with respect to overhead. Next, again one more question is there, basis for apportionment. Again past exam question. Indicate the basis that you would recommend to apportion the overhead cost to the production department. Basis we have to. Supplies. Actual supplies made to each department. Basis of apportionment, actual supplies made to each department. Repair, direct labor hour or mission hour is the criteria. Then maintenance of building, floor area occupied. Executive salary, actual basis or number of workers basis. Rent, floor area. Power, kilowatt hours. Light, number of light points. Fire insurance, capital cost of the plant and building or value of that particular stock. Fire insurance of building means capital cost of the building they are saying, and the stock means value of the stock involved. Indirect wages based on direct labor. That is what we discussed. Indirect wages in general, direct wages is the criteria. Suppose mission dependent industry, mission hour is the criteria. Yeah. Now, shall we go to the next one? Next important question. Blanket overhead rate and a departmental rate. Difference between blanket overhead and a departmental rate. It's a very popular question. Even short notes on blanket overhead rate also important question. May 99 November 2000, November 2007. Okay, it's a frequently asked question. Departmental rate represent what? Each and every department, if I am going to ascertain the rate, recovery rate, that is called a departmental rate. Department wise, I am going to apportion, or department wise, I am going to ascertain. Blanket overhead rate means single rate for all the departments. It will be department 1, department 2, department 3, process A, B, C. All the department, single rate if I am going to charge, then it is called one blanket overhead rate. Now you are comfortable. So blanket overhead rate and departmental rate. Now, with respect to blanket overhead rate, it refers to the computation of one single overhead rate for whole factory, nothing but all the department. The use of the blanket rate may be proper if the factory produces only one major product in the continuous process. So blanket overhead is possible or applicable only in case of single product, major product has to be produced. That is chemical, like chemical factory, or where the work performed in every department is fairly uniform or standardized. So all the department parallelly worked, uniform based worked, fair rate or fair working hours worked. Then, so uniform manner all the process has happened. One process more weightage, another process less weightage means this type of blanket overhead rate not possible. So the blanket overhead rate is suitable for two conditions you have to satisfy. First one, where only one major product has been produced. Only one major product. Second one, where several products are produced, but all the products processed through all the departments, and all the products are processed for the same length of time in each department. These are all the points you have to remember. I'll repeat one more time. Condition for using the blanket overhead rate. Two conditions. What are the first condition? Where only one major product has been produced. Or another one, where several products are produced, but all the product processed through all the department, and all the products are processed for the same length of time in each department. Next, where this condition does not exist, department rate should be used. That is, blanket overhead is not possible means then we can go for departmental rate. Formula for blanket overhead is overheads of the entire factory divided by number of hours. Okay. Now, departmental rate. It is also called multiple overhead rate. Okay. What is called multiple overhead rate? Departmental rate is called multiple overhead rate. Okay. It refers to separate rate for each individual cost center or department. Separate cost center, separate rate we have to apply. If the product lines are varied or machinery is used to a varying degree in the different varying degree in the different department, that is where the condition through the factory are not uniform, the use of the department rate may be preferred. Each and every department, different time consumption, different weightage is there. In this juncture, department rate only useful. Formula for departmental overhead rate is overhead allocated to each department divided by number of hours or corresponding basis for the each department. Clear? So blanket overhead rate as well as departmental rate, very frequently asked question. 5 mark question, expected question also. Good. Now we'll go to under absorption and over absorption. Difference in absorption. Under and over absorption. With respect to difference in absorption, based on the practical problem also there and a direct theory question also there. Okay. Short notes on difference in absorption or accounting treatment of under absorption. These are all very famous question. Now, difference in absorption. Absorbed overhead minus actual overhead. The difference is called a difference in absorption. What minus what is equal to difference in absorption? Absorbed overhead minus actual overhead is equal to difference in absorption. Absorbed overhead, what is called absorbed overhead? Actual overhead, no doubt. What is incurred, that is called actual overhead. Absorbed overhead represent what? Absorbed overhead represent, you come across various steps to solve the problem. Collection, classification, allocation, apportionment, reapportionment, recovery. Now we are going with the recovery. Recovery represent what? Recovery rate per hour. Suppose total expense of my department comes to 10,000 rupees, 10,000. Number of hours worked comes to 1,000 hours. Therefore, recovery rate per hour is equal to 10,000 divided by 1,000 is equal to rupees 10 per hour. 10 rupees per hour is the recovery rate per hour. Now, that is a benchmark for the purpose of absorption. So the absorption rate is 10 rupees. The next period, instead of 1,000 hours, number of hours worked comes to 1,500. Then 1,500 into 10 is equal to how much? 15,000. The 15,000 is called absorbed overhead. So the formula is what? Absorbed overhead minus actual overhead. The difference is called difference in absorption. How much is it absorbed overhead? 15,000. Suppose actual overhead 14,000. Actual overhead is how much? 14,000. Difference is how much? 1,000. The difference is called difference in absorption. Clear? Now you understood. So absorbed overhead, how to identify? Actual number of hours worked during this period into recovery rate per hour is equal to absorbed overhead. So absorbed overhead minus actual overhead is equal to difference in absorption. Now, the difference in absorption can be classified into under absorption or over absorption. It may be under absorption or over absorption. What is called under absorption? Absorbed overhead is less and the actual overhead more, then it is called under absorption. Shouldn't wrongly write actual overhead more means that's a over. No. The under absorption, therefore absorption less means under absorption. Absorption more means over absorption. Understand logic or not? So absorbed overhead is less, actual overhead more mean under absorption. Absorbed overhead more, actual overhead less means over absorption. Even our own same example, absorbed overhead 15,000, actual overhead 14,000. Therefore, different 1,000 is called over absorption. Same manner, absorbed overhead 15,000, actual overhead 17,000, difference 2,000. The 2,000 is called under absorption. So, absorbed overhead less means under absorption. Absorbed overhead more means over absorption. So the difference in absorption can be classified into two types, under absorption or over absorption. What could be the accounting treatment of the same? The difference in absorption we are going to classify into normal reason and abnormal reason. What is called abnormal reason? Abnormal reason, overhead, unit rate has been increased. It's a normal reason. Abnormal reason represent what? Strike period wages. Union problem. Okay, obsolescence happen. We have produced product got obsolescence, therefore no useful life, nobody ready to buy. Then whatever amount you have invested is a loss. Obsolescence. Lack of production planning. This is all past exam question. Lack of production planning, failure in planning. Because of that, the difference in absorption happen means those thing is called what? Those thing is called abnormal reason. The abnormal reason that amount, whatever we incurred, is a loss to the company. Therefore, that we have to transfer to costing P&L account. Suppose the difference in absorption incurred because of normal reason, then it's a cost, form part of cost of production. Normal reason means it's a cost, it's form part of cost of production. If it is form part of cost of production, how does it end the cost? We are going to charge in the T different fashion. We have to apportion the difference in absorption is the T different one. Number of units sold, closing stock of WAP, and closing stock of finished goods. In that ratio, we have to apportion. Normal reason cost, we have to apportion based on number of units sold, closing stock of WAP, and the closing stock of finished goods. This is the manner we have to apportion. Clear? So these are all the things you have to remember about what difference in absorption. treatment or accounting treatment of under absorption? It's a very famous question. So I'll read out so that you have a better clarity. Overheads are usually applied to production on the base of predetermined rates. The actual overhead rate will rarely coincide with the predetermined rates due to variation in predetermined overhead rate and actual rate. So actual rate and what predetermined rate may not going to be equal. Such variation may arise due to any of the following situation. First one, the number of units produced during the period is either more or less when compared to budgeted figure. Then actual overhead incurred are more or less than the estimated overhead for the period. Then if changes occur in different proportion, both the actual overhead and the number of units produced during the period. So these are all the reason for difference with respect to absorption. Then under absorption means absorbed overhead are less than actual, whereas over absorption means absorbed overheads are more than actual. Under absorption may due to normal reason or abnormal reason. Over absorption may arise due to error in estimation, seasonal fluctuation, unanticipated changes in method of production. Clear? So I'll repeat. Over absorption arises because of what? Error in estimation, seasonal fluctuation, and unanticipated changes in method of production. Then accounting treatment. In case of normal reason, what to do? The amount of normal increase in cost under absorption. In case of normal reason, the amount of normal increase in cost is apportioned to units sold, number of units sold, closing stock of WAP, and the closing stock of finished goods. Suppose the same under absorption due to abnormal reason, we have to transfer to costing P&L account. Example for the normal reason, genuine error in planning, changes in planning or premises, etc. In case of abnormal reason, strike period wages, writing of obsolescence expenses. Okay, lack of production planning also will come under abnormal reason. If it specifically mentioned genuine error, then it's form part of normal. Then over absorption, then accounting treatment. If the amount is relatively small, then writing off in the P&L account, write it off in the P&L account. The relatively large, then we have to go by way of supplementary overhead rate. You have to go by way of supplementary overhead rate. Then what is called supplementary overhead rate, we are going to discuss now. Okay. With respect to supplementary overhead rate, that is also a famous question, short notes question. When the amount of under absorption or over absorption is significant or large, because of difference due to wrong estimation, then the cost of the product need to be adjusted by using supplementary rates under and over absorption of overhead to avoid misleading impression. Supplementary overhead rate, why we are applying? We are estimating the cost of production due to this reason, due to what? Under absorption or over absorption. Then we have to change the cost of production itself. Otherwise, cost may not be actual cost. So it may not be fair price, we can't apportion to fix. For that purpose, you have to apply supplementary overhead rate. How to identify supplementary overhead rate? The difference in absorption in numerator cost divided by number of units. What is the number of units? Number of units sold plus closing stock of WAP plus closing stock of finished goods. It's a total quantity will come. So that rate per unit will come. Rate per unit you are going to multiply with the number of unit means you will get what? Total cost. The rate per unit is called supplementary overhead rate. Difference in absorption numerator amount, denominator quantity. What are the quantity? Number of units sold plus closing stock of WAP plus closing stock of finished goods. So that we will get recovery rate. That recovery rate is called, per unit cost is called supplementary overhead rate. Why we have to apply supplementary overhead rate? Then only we can be the person to fix the fair price. Clear? Now we are the last segment. Idle capacity and the packing expenses treatment. First we'll finish idle capacity. What is called idle capacity? You know, idle time. What is called idle time? Time during which workers are not engaged in the production activity is called idle time. Unproductive time is called idle time. Same manner, idle capacity represents what? Unproductive capacity is called idle capacity. Okay. So excess capacity is called idle capacity. Clear? So idle capacity represents excess capacity. Productions are there. 5 machines are we are using in generally. 5 machines are producing the product. Then due to corona, we are unable to use all the machine. Demand is less, or we can't afford to supply. Out of 5 machines, now 2 machines only working because very less demand. Therefore, the remaining 3 machines called what? High idle capacity, unutilized capacity. In Premier Academy, 100 students are there in the batch. After corona, now students are coming only 20. Parents are not ready to send the student to what? Academy. Then, so 100 minus 20, remaining 80 seats will be vacant. The 80 seats are called what? Idle capacity. Now, got it or not? Now, with respect to treatment of idle capacity cost, total overhead by normal capacity into idle capacity is equal to idle capacity cost. I'll repeat once again. Total overhead numerator, denominator, normal capacity cost into idle capacity cost. Proportionately, are taking. Okay. Idle capacity may arise due to lack of demand, shortage of raw material, shortage of labor, lack of power, seasonal nature, etc. Then, idle capacity may be classified into normal idle capacity and abnormal idle capacity. Then, accounting treatment for the same. Reason and treatment, 2-column table. Idle capacity due to unavoidable reason. Example, repairs and maintenance, change over the job, etc. Then treatment. Treated as a regular cost and included in the overhead. It forms part of cost of production because the normal nature. Then reason number 2, due to avoidable reason. Then example for avoidable reason, faulty planning, power failure, this and all. Then charge to costing P&L account because it's a loss. Idle capacity due to seasonal factors, then charge to cost of production. Clear? Only in case of avoidable reason, then we have to charge to costing P&L account. Okay. Then the next one is packing expenses. Accounting treatment with respect to packing expenses. That is also a past exam question. November 99, May 2011 question. Okay. 3 types of packing. Packing can be classified into 3 types. That will help you for the time of process costing also. Primary packing, secondary packing, and a special packing. Primary packing. What is primary packing? Without packing, we can't afford to get soap. Without wrapper, is it possible to get? The wrapper is called primary packing. Ointment, the tube is a primary packing. Okay. Secondary packing. Secondary packing for the purpose of what? Facilitate to transfer the product. We are purchasing for the purpose of we are one more pack we have to do. Then only we can transfer the product alone. We can't send. So we need some box. That is called what? Secondary packing. Special packing represent what? You know, gift wrapper. It's a special packing. Clear? Or during festival season or during birthday, you may ask you to do what? Extra special packing with a decorative cover. For that, sometimes you have to pay extra cost. That is called what? Special packing. Now we understood 3 different types of packing: primary, secondary, and what? Special packing. Now, with respect to primary packing, it's necessary to protect the product. It's called primary packing. Like ointment tube is what? Primary packing. Then treatment is what? It forms part of prime cost. It's a direct expenses. Therefore, it should be form part of prime cost. Then secondary packing. What is called secondary packing? I said it is facilitate for the purpose of transport the product, transportation. It is for fancy packing to attract the customer. It may be sometimes fancy packing to attract the customer. Then it is called what? It's not what specifically customer telling. Okay, the packing itself what? Decorative packing. Then it's a treatment is what? It may be distribution expenses or selling expenses, depending upon chocolates and all. Okay, fancy manner they'll do. So for that they have to incur the extra cost also to attract the children. then it is called what? Form part of. It's not for the purpose of transportation, it's for the purpose of attraction, therefore selling expenses. For the purpose of better transportation, we are going to do box expenses and all, then it is called what? Distribution. So it may be distribution expenses or selling expenses depending upon fancy packing or for the purpose of transportation. That is comes under what? Secondary packing. Special packing. Special packing, then special packing we have to what? The gift wrapper and all. That customer has to buy. I am saying, okay, this pen, but after purchasing the pen along with the box, I'll ask them to want special packing. So gift wrapper with the water, some stickers and all, birthday wishes and all. Then they may ask extra 10 rupees. Then that has to be bought by whom? Customer has to bear. That is called a special packing. Clear? Then accounting treatment of fringe benefit. One more question. May 2011, November 99, 98, 97 it seems. Clear? Very frequently asked question. Fringe benefit. What is called a fringe benefit? Any additional facility provided to the workers in addition to their salary and allowances are known as fringe benefit. Any additional benefit to the workers. In addition to salary, what we are providing benefit to the workers is called a fringe benefit, additional benefit, like allowances and all. Then it should form part of production overhead. It should be form part of one production overhead. Clear? So with this, I am concluding overhead topic. Comfortable with respect to overhead? Clear? Good. Be strong in theory, score highest mark in costing. Bye-bye.